It's House in Baltimore, and you only get him a couple times a year. He's the guy that when I have him on, like I literally get a cup of coffee here, a little Rofo coffee, and sit here and make some notes. Andrew Brandt joins us live from the home of the world champion Philadelphia Eagles. That doesn't ring right, does it, Andrew? That's a little weird, right?
Yeah, it's still hard to get used to. I'm coming to you from Philadelphia, and I'm actually looking about a block away at the home of Howie Roseman, who's the architect of this team. I know him well. I know Doug Peterson so well from my time in Green Bay. I used to call him every year and say, hey, you want to come back and be our backup? And I just saw success in these guys because they've grinded for so long in roles that have not, given them the opportunity to do what they've just done. And now it's come together. Really an amazing run. Forget about whether you know Philadelphia or like Philadelphia or not. Think about any team without a starting quarterback, without a starting left tackle, without their most versatile running back, without their best special teams player, without their best linebacker, and not only doing well, but winning the Super Bowl over Tom Brady et al. So I continue to just shake my head about that team and what they accomplished.
It's a great story, When we won 5 years ago, I wrote a book, and I started to peel back the onion of how Joe Flacco got drafted. There's a Philadelphia story. Joe Douglas being a huge part of that. Now that's part of this ongoing story that Joe Douglas has picked up another ring up there along with Andy Weidel and a bunch of guys. But Nick Foles, how about that, Andrew Brandt? Nick Foles, do you remember him throwing the ball that well? I mean, he was so accurate.
Yeah, he was. And the one thing, before I get to his on-field, I never really saw much of Foles off-field until actually he won the Super Bowl. He just impressed me so much. Something I showed to my kids, something I heard a lot of friends show to their kids, just the way he talked about his life and a lot of failures, frankly. And a lot of a normal person would really get down, and he got down to the point where he was on a camping trip, basically retired, came back to civilization, and had a message from Andy Reid saying, please come play for us in Kansas City. And he decided to. I mean, this guy, 16, 18 months ago, he was out of football.
There's a lot of redemption, though, in this sport, and that's maybe why America loves it. I mean, let's talk about Kurt Warner. Let's talk about Aaron Rodgers, who sat there in that green room for 5 hours, and you were a part of that. Let's talk about Joe Flacco not being able to get on the field at Pitt and having to come back to Audubon with his tail between his legs and go play at DAA, 1AA Delaware. I mean, and then there's this kid who's been everywhere. Case Keenum's another guy who was sitting in a tree and got a call and came and beat the Ravens 4 years ago. I mean, these quarterbacks, we often say, well, you're a backup, or as you said, do you want to come and be my backup for the year? Well, you're only a backup till the starter turns his knee, and then all of a sudden the lights are on you, right?
Yeah, and Foles has a great, I call him a flatliner, kind of like the way I describe Andy Reid, and that's not a bad thing. They just have an ability to not let anything get to them, good or bad. And they just sort of are always one way, and that's Foles. In terms of on the field, I don't know how many people have given much credit to a guy named Chip Kelly, but when I got to Philadelphia, there was a coach named Kelly and a quarterback named Foles, and they were setting the league on fire. On fire. 27 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 2013. That is Manning and Brady-esque that year, and I think what Doug Peterson learned after a couple games where things were pretty shaky, got back to that with a lot of read option, and that's Foles. I mean, Foles is big and lanky and as lumbering as he is, he can really execute the stick the ball in the mesh point of the running back, pull it out, and find accuracy. He's an amazing player that way. Now, I just think that Chip Kelly gets some credit for that because he was not successful anywhere else. He came back here. Doug Peterson's very creative and brought that back.
Andrew Brandt is our guest. You can find him out on Twitter at Andrew Brandt. Of course, the columnist at the MMQB, now with The Athletic, doing that great Business of Sports podcast and getting things done up there in Villanova where they can win another championship up there in a couple of weeks. I mean, I'm sure Jay Wright has some designs on that around campus, correct, Andrew?
Yeah, I'm really lucky. I mean, I have my media career and I have my academic career where I run a sports law, sports business, sports management program at Villanova. And right across the lawn is Jay Wright, who runs, with all the negativity about college basketball. And I don't know every nook and cranny of recruiting these kids, but he's got good kids. They're humble. They're hungry. They stay at least 3 years. And he's got it going on right now. So we'll see what happens in the next month.
I want to move this on to the owners' meetings. I just came back from the combine, and look, I could sit here and talk to you about this kid with one arm playing football. I mean, it's unbelievable stuff that we're still seeing in this day and age, things we haven't seen before in some sort of Jim Abbott way. But I think getting to the owners' meetings down in Orlando and all of the warfare that's going on with Jerry and the rest of these guys and getting in a room, they're not moving any franchises here, and maybe the biggest thing that's going to come out of this is defining the catch. But I think the undercurrent of all of this, and you've attended many of these meetings, is what is your politics when you walk in the room as far as where you are on the knee, where you are on Trump, where your fans are. Boy, we got a huge problem here in Baltimore with the knee. I don't need to tell you how many empty seats, the season tickets are going out, and the Ravens are going to have to do something. And I talked to some people from Jacksonville and Tampa and some other places where they had to sell tickets. I mean, you up in Green Bay, you rolled out of bed for the most part, tickets are sold, people want to be there. That was something that you never had to concern yourself with, and other places always had to concern themselves with selling tickets. They certainly have that problem in Los Angeles times too right now. But here in Baltimore, we're entering a really weird phase where 22, 23 years into PSLs, the people that were 40 are now 65, the experience has changed, and they're real worried about whether that stadium's ever going to be full here again.
It's an interesting comment. I mean, you talked about it. Now news today that Stephen Ross was going to be upset with players that continue to kneel. Then he backtracked on those comments. We've heard talks about the Texans with their very conservative fan base and owner not signing, not even being interested in free agents that may potentially not stand for the anthem. It's not going away, Nestor. That's really the point here. And after Trump's comments last year and the owners in solidarity with the players, I said on TV, I wrote in my columns, this is not going to last. This is not going to last. What's going to happen here is that the owners and the business partners are going to want to get back to sports, and the players aren't. And that's going to be a problem. Now, to everyone's credit, Roger Goodell, Malcolm Jenkins, Chris Long, everyone worked out a nice deal. They're going to put money into these social causes over the next 5-10 years. That's great. But there's a faction of players that's like, no. And there's a faction of players that broke away from that group, whether it's Eric Reed or Russell Okung or others. And this is not going away. So how do we deal with it? Well, you can change the rule. The rule doesn't require standing. But that might be the owners giving up on something else in the CBA or something like that. I just think we're going to continue to have this, and networks are probably going to not televise the anthem. And everyone's going to act like it's not a problem, but it still may be some places.
I find it fascinating this day and age, the labor unrest. You always say there will be lawyers, right? When there will be lawyers in regard to Colin Kaepernick getting blackballed, I mean, in front of the whole world in 2018, he was absolutely Kurt-flooded in the modern era, gaslighted kind of sort of in every way, and we've just stood by and said, who's next, right? That's literally where the league is right now. And I don't know that that's ever going to sit well in a league that will seemingly always be primarily minority-based.
Yeah, I mean, I think the business part of it is, the owners have leverage. The owners use their leverage. This has been a very owner-friendly CBA since 2011. DeWario Smith and the union does clap back at things, and they make statements, but at the end of the day, the owners are swimming in money, and I'm not sure the players are getting their fair share. You hope they are, but it just seems like less and less players hit it big in free agency. Yeah, you have 20 or so quarterbacks making big money, but, by and large, to compare the NFL players' compensation with any other sport, it really looks like the children's table, especially on the guarantees. That's the most secure part of the contract. And I don't know what it's going to take. I mean, it's going to take players like Kirk Cousins, Aaron Rodgers, to really break the seal on fully guaranteed deals, and maybe that'll open up the floodgates a little bit.
Andrew Brandt is our guest. You can follow his journey out on Twitter and, of course, at the MMQB, as well as The Athletic, and hosting the Business of Sports pod out of the Fighting City of Philadelphia, home of the world champs. I have to say that because I said that when we won, which, I guess brings this from football to baseball, Andrew, and where life without a floor, life without a salary cap. You are uniquely qualified. It's one of the reasons I love your expertise and I love your work is that you've been on both sides of this. I mean, you can put your agent hat on and say, my players are getting screwed, they're not getting a fair share. And then you can put your Packers hat on, your league hat on, and Commissioner Brandt, hat on and say, well, it is the business and the owners are taking all the risk and they're putting out and, we're going to fight about it every 4 to 6 years and whatever we decide, we decide. Boy, the baseball thing starts to really stink for these guys. But in baseball, every owner has been bilked by an Ubaldo Jimenez or a Chris Davis. Every owner has pounded sand on $20, $30, $40, $50 million worth of contract, and they've eaten it time and time again if you've owned a team for 20 or 30 years. And on the football side, I love when you point out how, like, a couple of guys get over, like the cornerback, Revis, would always get paid, and he always sort of made a whole lot of money, and Matt Stafford's always sort of squeezed the dollar out when he's never won anything. And then Flacco had his moment and squeezed it when he had it because he had the belt on, as they would say in wrestling vernacular. But the baseball side of this, I've been screaming 27 years on the radio. If these guys wanted to do something positive, they should make everybody in the sport spend $125 million. Then you'd have a more competitive product in the field, and the Brewers would want to go sign people in the offseason.
Yeah, it's interesting, really interesting baseball now, and I did a podcast with Baltimore's own Kenny Rosenthal, and we talked a lot about it because it just seemed to be a stagnant market. Now, these guys were free agents starting in November, and the ice was just broken a couple weeks ago with Yu Darvish and a couple others.
Well, Jake Arrieta doesn't have a job. I mean, it's crazy.
And here we are in mid-March. It's amazing that this is not a bigger story. I think it's just because everyone's so focused on the NFL 365 days a year. But it's amazing because here's the thing that you asked me about caps versus no caps. Here's where baseball needs a cap. And I'm sure everyone listening like, what? I'm like...
Yeah, Marvin Miller's not liking that right now.
Yeah, here's how it would help baseball players. Because caps don't only have ceilings. They have floors. And in the NFL... Although, don't get me started on the floor in the NFL because I think the union negotiated way too low a floor. But there is a floor. And in the NHL, there is a floor. And the NBA, there is a floor. And in Major League Baseball, there's no floor. So you have teams like the Marlins that can get away with spending, I don't know, $80, $90 million on payroll while teams are spending $300 million. And not only that, but on the bigger picture, you have teams saying, nah, we're not going to sign free agents. Is that collusion? No, because everyone's going to recognize, okay, that team's just deciding, they're going to go young, or they're not going to give more than a 3-year deal for the free agents. Well, not collusion.
You and I have lived in a world where we've loved baseball. We're of that age where we grew up into baseball. You grew up and worked into football. You're in a city that has, at various points, loved baseball. Here in Baltimore, we've just had such poor management for a quarter of a century where it really does feel like everyone is squeezing what they can squeeze out of it when the median age of the sport is 58 at this point.
Yeah.
And look, I grew up with Ken Rosenthal. I remember when he came down from Camden to work with me at the Sun many years ago, and he's in the middle of this now in broadcasting and writing about it. But I would be very, very worried about the future of baseball in general, and I am worried as a guy who's done this for a living for 3 decades that 3 decades from now I wonder what baseball is going to look like. I wonder what football is going to look like because of CTE and all that, but I think on the baseball side, people are kind of bored with it, and I think that this part of this is it's not as competitive. There are 15 places right now where you can't win. I was in Indy last week. Everyone there is selling hope, and I can sort of even buy hope from the Cleveland Browns at this time of the year that they could win 8 or 9 games if they got the right thing that happened for them over the next 5 months.
Yeah, and I saw Rob Manfred talk, and the one thing I'll say about Manfred compared to Goodell or other owners, he was pretty open. I was at the Sloan conference at MIT, and he was being interviewed. And he just, they were talking about this limited market right now. He was not shy. He basically said, you know what, this time we got a good deal. We meaning the owners. I know that Roger Goodell would never say that. He would never embarrass the players like that. But we're really not an embarrassing thing, just an honest, open statement. And that's the one side of it. The other side of it is, how do you get younger viewers? This is not just baseball. This is every league trying to figure this thing out. One thing you got to do is speed up the game, and how much can you speed up baseball? That's really the question. You can have pitch counts and all that, but are they really going to speed up baseball enough to attract a younger audience? I just don't know.
Andrew Brandt can be followed at the MMQB as well as the Athletic, and of course at the Business of Sports and at Andrew Brandt out on Twitter. It is always a pleasure to have your time and make your acquaintance. I tell you, it was a pleasure seeing your child as well at the Super Bowl, and that's his Super Bowl, right? Like, to see it through the eyes of your kid winning a Super Bowl and going to school and everybody's got the gear. We've had that a couple of times here. There's not much better than that, than when your team wins, right?
Yeah, although I'll say we're still Packer fans. He was at that party you saw him. He was so excited to meet a couple Packers that were there. That was his real aim for that party. But, Aaron will be back next year, and I would put the Packers and Eagles right at the top of the NFC.
Well, I'll tell you what, I would agree with you, and we got our own problems around here in the offseason trying to make the football team better. So we'll be handling that. Hope to see you somewhere down the road, and keep up the great work out there. We love following your work.
You got it, Nestor. Thanks for having me.
Andrew Brandt joining us here, columnist from the MMQB and the Athletic, as well as the Business of Sports. He's up at Villanova. I highly encourage you to follow him out on Twitter and read his work, some of the most insightful work that I find in sports media, probably because he's not really a media guy. He's more of an insider, so that makes it even better. You can find me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world that you travel. Of course, our morning newspaper delivers to your email inbox, chock full of great stuff each and every morning at 7 a.m. That's all brought to you by our friends at Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Guaranteed. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. And if there's any breaking news at all, you're going to get it first on the WNST Tech Service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis Colatzos will be here from 3 until 5 each and every Thursday, driving you home, getting you ready primarily for the draft, because Dennis is all fired up about the draft. We'll be here in Baltimore. No one's going to Dallas for the draft this year, but Luke and I are going to have the best coverage. The Liars Luncheon coming up in a couple of weeks as well. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.